I never imagined silence could be so cruel. On the morning of my wedding, I stood in a white dress that shimmered under soft vineyard light, waiting for my parents to arrive, waiting for a message, a word, anything, but nothing came. Not a call, not a text, not even a cheap excuse. The guests whispered, the music played, and every empty seat in the front row screamed louder than any insult I'd ever heard. That silence cut deeper than rejection. It was confirmation that I had been invisible all along, even on the day I was supposed to be seen. I smiled for the cameras and walked down the aisle alone, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending the absence of family wasn't swallowing me whole. But inside, I was breaking, one step at a time. If you're enjoying this, please subscribe and share. Your support keeps the stories coming. I remember standing there at the altar, my hand trembling as Ethan took it, whispering, "You're enough." For a moment, I wanted to believe him. Yet as the vows left my lips, I could hear echoes from the past, the sound of my mother praising my sister, Hannah, for another performance, another achievement, while my own accomplishments were brushed aside like they were inconveniences. I used to bring my drawings to her as a child, bright colors and hope smeared across paper, but she'd only say, "That's nice, Sophie. Can you take the trash out?" When Hannah brought home an average grade, they'd celebrate like she'd discovered electricity. It wasn't that I wasn't loved, it was that I was tolerated. And I learned early on that tolerance is just a colder word for neglect. When I built my first startup in college, they called it a hobby. When it made its first profit, they called it luck. And when it grew enough for me to quit my corporate job, they called it reckless. My father even laughed at me once, swirling his glass of scotch, saying, "Sophie, some people chase dreams. Others build real lives." I wanted to scream that I was doing both, but I didn't. I just nodded and worked harder, because deep down, I thought success might earn me a seat at their table. I thought if I made enough noise in the world, they'd finally turn their heads toward me. But success without love feels hollow, like shouting into a canyon and hearing only your own echo come back. The wedding was supposed to be the day all that changed. I'd sent invitations months in advance, even called to confirm they'd received them. My mother's exact words were, "We'll see, dear. Your father's got a few things lined up." A few things. As if my marriage was a dentist appointment they might skip if traffic was bad. I paid for everything myself, the dress, the venue, the flowers. They offered nothing but silence. On the day itself, I kept my phone nearby, checking it between makeup sessions, between photos, between breaths. Every time it stayed blank, the truth sank deeper. They weren't coming. That night, while guests clinked glasses and offered congratulations, I felt like an orphan in a room full of witnesses. I smiled, posed, laughed, but every compliment felt heavy. Ethan's mother hugged me tighter than my own ever had, whispering, "You're one of us now." It should have been comforting. It was, but also heartbreaking, because it showed me what love could feel like if it wasn't rationed. After the wedding, I sent my parents a photo, a simple one, just Ethan and me cutting the cake. No response. Not a word. That silence followed me like a shadow into my new life. Months passed. My company, Luminary Media, grew faster than I could have dreamed. Late nights turned into full teams, small contracts turned into million-dollar clients, and for once, I didn't need anyone's approval. Every deal I closed was a quiet rebellion, every milestone a whisper of defiance. I poured myself into work, chasing results not out of greed but survival. When you've been unseen your whole life, success becomes proof that you exist. And then came the Porsche. The car wasn't just metal and wheels, it was liberation, a statement to the universe that I had built something real, something undeniable. The day I drove it out of the dealership, the reflection of the city lights on its white surface felt like validation carved in steel. I didn't post about it. I didn't flaunt it. But small towns have big mouths. Someone saw me pull up to the office, someone else mentioned it at a dinner, and within a week, the rumor had reached the one place I'd never wanted it to, home. My phone rang late one night, and I nearly didn't answer when I saw Hannah's name flashing. When I picked up, her voice was careful, like she was reading from a script. "Hey, Mom and Dad were wondering if you're free for dinner next weekend." For a second, I thought she was joking. 5 years of silence, and now they were wondering? I asked her why. The pause told me everything. "They saw your car," she admitted quietly. It was almost funny. The same parents who couldn't be bothered to show up at my wedding now suddenly remembered I existed because of a car. But curiosity won. I agreed. Not for reconciliation, not for closure, but because I wanted to see what love with strings attached looked like up close. That Friday evening, I drove the Porsche back to the house I once called home. The neighborhood hadn't changed, the same perfectly trimmed lawns, the same neighbors who whispered behind lace curtains. I parked in the driveway, the engine still humming as my father opened the front door. "Sophie," he said, the word coated in a smile too wide, too forced. His eyes darted past me to the car. "You've done well for yourself. Not you look happy, not we missed you." Just an assessment of worth. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered, same beige walls, same dusty family portraits, same heavy air of quiet judgment. My mother appeared from the kitchen, her perfume as strong as her control. "Sweetheart," she said, placing a hand on my cheek, pretending affection like it was a performance. "You look wonderful." I wanted to tell her she hadn't earned that right, but instead, I smiled. "So do you," I lied. We sat down to dinner. Hannah was there too, fidgeting with her napkin, clearly uncomfortable. My father poured wine, asking casual questions about the business, emphasizing the word as if it were some hobby I'd outgrown. "It's going well," I said, keeping my tone light. He nodded, eyes flicking toward the Porsche visible through the window. "It must be," he said, "I mean, that's quite a car." My mother chimed in, "Yes, darling, you must be doing very well. Maybe it's time we invest together, as a family. You know, opportunities." I froze mid-bite. Invest? Family? These were the same people who hadn't even sent a text when I signed my first client. The same people who vanished on my wedding day. I placed my fork down slowly, forcing my heartbeat to steady. "That's interesting," I said, smiling faintly. "I always thought family invested in people, not profits." The room fell silent. My father's jaw tightened, my mother's smile faltered. Hannah looked like she wanted to disappear. Then he said it, the sentence that shattered the fragile civility in the room. "You wouldn't have this fortune if we hadn't raised you to work hard. In a way, we built your success." He actually believed it. After years of neglect, he wanted credit for the scars I turned into strength. I looked at him, at the man who taught me everything about discipline but nothing about love, and felt a wave of cold clarity. I wanted to speak. To say everything I'd held in for years, but before I could, my mother reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper, her expression suddenly serious. "We just need your signature," she said. "It's nothing big, just a small favor for family." My pulse quickened as she slid the document toward me across the table. The paper looked harmless, white, crisp, ordinary, but something in her tone told me it was anything but. I met her gaze, steady, calm, unreadable. "What kind of favor?" I asked, my voice lower now, measured. Her answer came with that same rehearsed softness she used when lying. "Your brother's business ran into some trouble. Just a temporary loan. We'll pay you back, of course." And that's when I realized, this dinner wasn't about reconciliation. It was a transaction. The room felt smaller the moment she said those words, as if the air itself had tightened around me. For years, I had dreamed of sitting at that dining table again and finally feeling seen. I never imagined that when I did, it would be as a walking checkbook. My hands trembled under the table, not out of fear but from the kind of anger that burns silently, the kind that doesn't shout, it freezes. I glanced at the document again, my name neatly typed where the signature line waited. The paper was a symbol of everything they had reduced me to, an opportunity, not a daughter. My mother's eyes, glossy and calculating, watched for my reaction. My father leaned back in his chair, pretending this was all casual, as if exploiting their own child was part of family tradition. I swallowed hard and managed a small smile, the kind I used to wear as a child when they asked me to be polite even when humiliated. "So this is why I was invited," I said softly. My mother hesitated, her hand tightening around the stem of her wine glass. "Don't be dramatic, Sophie," she said with that familiar dismissive tone that had once made me feel small. "Families help each other. You've done so well. It's your turn to give back." Give back. The words hit like acid. I wanted to remind her that I had begged for their attention for years, that I had built everything they now admired without a single ounce of their help. But instead, I kept my voice calm, too calm, and asked, "And when I needed help? Where were you then?" My father sighed, as if my pain was an inconvenience. "You always exaggerate. You've always been overly sensitive." That line. The one he had used my entire life to erase my feelings, to make sure my hurt sounded like a flaw instead of proof of his neglect. I felt that old wound reopen. I wasn't a child anymore, though. The girl who once stayed silent was gone. Overly sensitive? I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You ignored my wedding, and now you want my money. Forgive me for not being numb enough for your comfort." The tension cracked, and Hannah, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, her voice small. "Sophie, please. It's not like that. Things have been hard for them. Just help them out this once." I turned to her, the sister who had always been their golden child, the mirror of their expectations. "You mean help you, don't you?" I said. Her eyes widened. I could see the guilt before she said a word. She looked down, and that silence was all the confirmation I needed. My mother sighed dramatically. "Honestly, Sophie, I thought success would make you more generous." I felt something inside me shift, like a cord snapping after being pulled too tight for too long. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Generosity requires trust," I said quietly. And you lost that years ago. My father's voice turned sharp. Don't take that tone with us. We're still your parents. I met his gaze, steady and cold. Parents are people who show up. You're just strangers who share my last name. The room fell into stunned silence. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear, it was freedom. For once, I didn't feel like the invisible child in their house. I felt like the woman I had fought to become. I pushed the papers back toward my mother. You'll figure it out, I said, turning away. But before I could reach the door, my father's voice stopped me. Don't forget where you came from, he said sharply. I turned back, meeting his eyes one last time. I haven't, I said. I just learned not to stay there. Then I left. The night air outside felt like a storm breaking. My chest was tight, but not from regret, from release. I slid into the Porsche, the leather cold against my skin, and for a moment I just sat there, staring at the house where I had once waited for love that never came. The lights inside flickered, shadows moving behind the curtains, the same scene that had always played out, pretend perfection hiding rot underneath. I started the car, the engine roaring softly, and drove away. But as the road stretched before me, tears blurred the headlights. You can escape the house, but the ghosts follow for a while. The next weeks were strange. My phone buzzed with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, each one coded in politeness that felt like bait. Heard you came by. So proud of you. Your parents told us you're doing well, good for you. Every text was another reminder that word had spread. My family hadn't changed. They had just found new ways to pretend. I ignored them all, burying myself in work again. But no matter how busy I stayed, I couldn't silence that echo in my head, my father's words, my mother's calculated smile. I wanted to believe walking away was enough, but sometimes walking away doesn't end the story. It just changes the scenery. A few months later, something unexpected happened. I received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership conference in London, a chance to share my journey from startup founder to CEO. I accepted immediately. Standing on that stage weeks later, looking out at hundreds of faces, I realized I wasn't telling my story just to inspire others. I was telling it to heal myself. Success isn't about proving people wrong, I said during the keynote. It's about proving to yourself that you were always enough, even when no one else believed it. The audience applauded. But behind the noise, I felt a deep quiet inside me, a kind I hadn't known before. After the event, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 20, her voice trembling as she said, "Your story? It's mine too." Her eyes were full of that same mix of pain and determination I'd once carried. I hugged her and whispered, "You'll be fine. Just don't wait for people to see your worth. Live like you already know it." That night, back in my hotel room, I stood by the window overlooking the Thames and thought about how far I'd come from the girl begging for her parents' approval. Maybe healing didn't mean forgetting, it meant learning to live beautifully even with the scars, but peace is never permanent when your past still has your number. A week later, my phone rang again, an unfamiliar number, but I recognized the voice instantly. "Sophie," my mother said, her tone trembling slightly, "it's your father? He's not well." The words sank in slowly. Part of me wanted to hang up. Another part, still that small child desperate for connection, hesitated. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "He had a mild heart attack," she said. "He's stable now, but he's been asking for you." The world outside the window blurred. I hated how quickly the old guilt resurfaced. They had hurt me beyond repair, yet the thought of not seeing him if something worse happened felt unbearable. "I'll come tomorrow," I said finally. "But I'm not promising anything more than that." When I arrived at the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and the hum of machines filled the air. My father looked smaller somehow, deflated, the man who once towered over me now looking fragile. His eyes opened when he heard my voice. "You came," he whispered. I nodded, unsure what to say. For a long time, we just sat in silence. Then, in a raspy voice, he said, "I shouldn't have said those things." I looked at him, searching for sincerity. "You said a lot of things," I replied softly. "Which ones do you mean?" He smiled faintly, a sad, tired smile. "All of them." For a moment, I wanted to believe it, that maybe age had softened him, that maybe remorse could rewrite history. But apologies don't undo absence, and regret doesn't rebuild trust. Still, I stayed. Not for him, but for me, to prove that compassion doesn't make me weak. After a while, he fell asleep. My mother entered, her usual grace replaced by exhaustion. "He's been different since the attack," she said quietly. "Maybe it's not too late." I looked at her, this woman who had once treated affection like a privilege to be earned. "For what?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "For us. For our family." I wanted to tell her that family isn't something you rebuild with one apology, it's something you nurture every day, and she had never done that. But all I said was, "We'll see." That night, as I left the hospital, rain began to fall, blurring the city lights into a watercolor of silver and gold. I realized then that forgiveness isn't a door you open for others, it's a window you open for yourself, to let the air back in. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was ready to stop letting their absence define me. Weeks turned into months, and I found myself changing. I started a mentorship program at Luminary Media for young women who came from broken families, those who needed someone to tell them they were capable. Each story reminded me that pain can be repurposed, that we can turn what hurt us into what helps others. The first time one of my ments, Clara, landed her dream job, she sent me a message that read, "You made me believe I could." I smiled, realizing that was the kind of legacy I wanted, not money, not validation, but impact still. One thing lingered, I hadn't truly confronted my parents. Not with anger, but with truth. I needed to close that chapter, not by walking away again, but by saying what had been left unsaid. So, one bright spring morning, I drove back, not to their house this time, but to the care home where my father was recovering. My mother was there, sitting beside him, reading quietly. When they saw me, both looked startled. I didn't sit down right away. I just said, "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to say goodbye properly." My mother's lip trembled, but she didn't speak. My father looked at me for a long moment, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "You did well," he said finally. "I'm proud of you." It was the first time in 30 years I had heard those words from him, and though they came decades late, they still landed deep. Tears stung my eyes, but I managed a smile. "Thank you," I whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." We didn't hug. We didn't cry together. But in that small exchange, something unspoken shifted, a fragile truce, not born of understanding, but of letting go. As I stepped outside into the sunlight, I realized that closure doesn't always come with grand gestures or perfect apologies. Sometimes, it's just knowing that you survived the story that tried to break you, and turned it into something worth telling. By the time the leaves began turning gold outside my apartment window, I had stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. The ache that used to live behind my ribs had quieted into something gentler, a kind of acceptance that didn't need validation. I had spent so much of my life waiting to be chosen, to be loved, to be seen. But waiting is just another form of grief when the people you're waiting for will never show up the way you need them to. So I stopped waiting. I started living. My mornings now began with peace instead of pressure. I'd drive across the Willamette Bridge in my Porsche, the city rising in the soft haze of dawn, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. The car that had once screamed success now whispered something quieter, freedom. I parked outside the new Luminary Foundation office, the one I'd opened downtown, a wide, airy space filled with plants, art, and sunlight. Young women filled the desks, their laughter soft but confident, each one a version of the girl I once was. Every day here felt like rewriting history, not to erase the pain, but to give it purpose. Maya was the newest addition to the program, a film student with a quiet determination that reminded me of myself at 20. She had grown up in a foster system, constantly uprooted, always proving she belonged. When I first met her, she barely made eye contact, her voice trembling when she spoke about her dreams. "I just want to tell stories that matter," she'd said. Stories about women who survived things they weren't supposed to. I saw something in her instantly, a fire waiting for air. Over the next months, I watched her grow from timid to unstoppable. The same girl who once second-guessed every frame now commanded her camera with conviction. Guiding her wasn't work. It was healing. Teaching her how to light a scene, edit a story, or pitch her vision reminded me that I hadn't just survived my past, I had turned it into something worth passing on. One afternoon, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, Maya approached me while I was reviewing grant proposals. "I've finished the final cut of my documentary," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Would you watch it with me?" I smiled, setting my laptop aside. "Of course." We walked into the small screening room at the back of the office, the walls lined with film posters from past ments. As the lights dimmed and her documentary began, I felt myself drawn in immediately. It was called Roots of Resilience, and it followed 3 generations of women in a rural Oregon family, each facing poverty, loss, and love in their own ways. The way Maya captured their strength, their silence, their raw humanity, it was breathtaking. When the credits rolled, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "You're the reason I believe I can do this," she said softly, her voice breaking. Something inside me cracked open. For years, I had chased words like those from my parents, believing that without their approval, nothing I achieved would ever feel complete. Yet here, hearing them from someone I had mentored, they felt truer than anything I'd ever wanted to hear. I reached out, pulling her into a hug. "No, Maya," I whispered, "you did this because you believed in yourself. I just reminded you what was already there." As we sat there in the dim glow of the monitor, I thought of Miss Rivera, my high school art teacher, the first adult who had ever seen potential in me when my parents saw nothing. I remembered the days she'd told me, "You don't need to be chosen, Sophie. You just need to choose yourself." That sentence had been my lifeline through years of invisibility. And now, somehow, I had become that voice for someone else. The following week, I received a letter from the Portland Arts Center. I'd been nominated for their Community Leadership Award, an honor recognizing those who had made a tangible difference in local creative communities. I stared at the letter for a long time, not out of disbelief but out of quiet recognition. It wasn't about the award itself. It was about everything it represented. Every sleepless night, every setback, every moment I thought I wasn't enough, all of it had led here. When the night of the ceremony arrived, I wore a simple black gown, elegant but understated. Ethan was by my side, his hand warm against mine as we entered the grand hall. The room was filled with people I respected, artists, leaders, dreamers, and for the first time, I didn't feel out of place. When they called my name, applause erupted, echoing through the hall. I stepped onto the stage, the lights bright but soft, the kind that make you feel seen without being exposed. As I reached the podium, I glanced at Ethan sitting in the front row. His smile wasn't one of pride. It was one of love, the kind that doesn't need to be earned. Behind him sat members of my team, including Maya, their faces glowing with admiration. There were no empty seats haunting me, no ghosts of absence whispering that I was unworthy. Everyone who mattered was here. I took a deep breath, the microphone cool against my fingertips. This journey, I began, my voice steady, started in invisibility. I spent years trying to earn approval from people who refused to give it. But somewhere along the way, I stopped chasing it, and started creating impact instead. I paused, scanning the crowd. Today, I don't measure my worth by who claps for me, but by what we build together. The audience rose in a standing ovation, the sound washing over me like a cleansing wave. As I stood there, tears burning behind my eyes, I realized this was more than success, it was redemption. When the applause faded, I stepped off stage, and Ethan met me halfway, wrapping me in his arms. "You did it," he whispered. "You finally let go." I nodded, resting my head against his shoulder. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think I finally did." The days that followed were filled with celebration. Messages poured in, invitations to collaborate, articles highlighting my work. But amidst all the excitement, I stayed grounded. I had learned that happiness doesn't live in recognition. It lives in peace. The Luminary Foundation grew rapidly, expanding across the state. Maya's documentary was selected for a national festival, and when she called to tell me, her joy was contagious. "You have to come," she said. "You're part of this too." I promised I would. One chilly December evening, as I drove home through downtown Portland, the city shimmered with holiday lights. The Porsche glided smoothly across the wet streets, reflections of red and gold flickering against its surface. I passed the small coffee shop where I used to edit videos on a borrowed laptop years ago, the same place where I'd once dreamed of having enough money, enough talent, enough love. Through the window, I saw a couple walking hand in hand. Something about the way the woman tilted her head made me look closer. My heart skipped. It was my mother. And beside her, walking slowly with a cane, was my father. Time seemed to slow. They hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I froze, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. Then, as if sensing my gaze, my mother looked up. Our eyes met through the glass. There was no anger, no guilt, just a quiet understanding. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I simply nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and drove on. The weight that had once crushed me was gone. They had taught me what love isn't, and in their absence, I had learned what it truly is. When I reached home, Ethan was waiting by the fireplace, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "You're quiet," he said gently. I sat beside him, the warmth of the fire soft against my skin. "I saw them," I said. He didn't need to ask who. He just nodded. "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Peaceful," I said. "Finally peaceful." That night, as snow began to fall outside, I opened my laptop to review applications for the Foundation's new emergency fund for students facing hardship. The program had been my newest idea, to make sure no talented young woman gave up her dream because she couldn't afford to keep it alive. As I read through the stories, each one a mix of pain and perseverance, I felt tears prick my eyes. I knew exactly what these girls needed, not pity, but belief. And belief was something I could give endlessly now. Months later, I stood again at the Art Center, this time not as an honoree, but as a speaker for the next generation. Maya introduced me with poise and pride, her confidence radiating through the room. "Sophie taught me that we don't need permission to shine," she said. "We just need courage." As I took the stage, I smiled at her, the fullness of the moment settling deep in my chest. This was it, the continuation of a story that had once felt like it ended in pain. But here, surrounded by light, laughter, and purpose, I understood, some stories don't end. They evolved later, as the evening faded and the crowd dispersed. Maya handed me a camera. Your turn, she said playfully. I laughed, adjusting the lens. What should I shoot? Whatever you want, she replied. I lifted the camera, focusing on her, the next generation, standing taller than I ever did. Through the viewfinder, I saw not just her face but every version of myself I'd ever been, the scared girl, the ambitious dreamer, the broken woman, the survivor. I pressed the shutter. The click echoed softly in the empty hall, sealing the moment forever. As I lowered the camera, I whispered to myself, family isn't who raises you. It's who lifts you. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely lifted.